having me. And congratulations on getting some good things started for kids. Been able to follow from afar and look. Well, first I'd like to say good evening and thanks for having me. And congratulations on getting some good things started for kids. Been able to follow from afar and looking and listening to the work that you all are doing for kids. Thank you for that. And then again, I think I met everyone in those meetings.
Yeah.
So
She's not, she just, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
she just texted me, she's in the wrong place.
Yeah, I just saw it too.
I'm forwarding her an email.
Oh, we're sending a board member.
Doing it too, yeah.
Or you send it, okay.
I just
I'll
linked.
let you send it.
So Tyler, I just linked you up with Lisa. If you could, she's in the wrong meeting, so.
I heard it's a good meeting.
It's
well.
very quiet. I've been in those meetings. Okay, Brad, go ahead.
So, and then, so police on
Hi, I'm sorry. Do you see me and the PowerPoint or just me?
Just you.
you see just you.
Okay. This is going to be one of those days. So first of all, we want to start with just acknowledging what is happening across the nation, the climate, how it's affecting all of us differently and like in different layers and levels. So not only has this been like a hard year, I don't know about you all, it's been a very interesting hard year, but also like the combination of a lot of things happening, especially this last couple of weeks. And even today, just been a lot of things to process. So we just want to put that in the room, acknowledge that, and acknowledge the that when we're talking about levels of oppression, what does that look like, especially currently in the space that we're in. So I just want to put that in the room before we begin. Is there anybody that would like to make a comment about that, or how are you doing is really the question.
I don't know, I'm doing well. You know, I'm just trying to maintain my own little piece of the world.
Anyone else?
I think I've ceased to be surprised by the crazy. And so it's not nearly as shocking as it has been in the past. I think maybe a little bit of apathy is set in, which isn't always a good thing either. But I am no longer surprised. Nothing surprises.
And I agree with that, but I recognize that over the last couple of weeks, I've had moments in time where just in extreme sadness overwhelms me, and I just can't seem to shake it. Just this, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said their wife was struggling with the same thing, and he equated it to just a helplessness, feeling of helplessness. I think that's kind of the way I've been doing that. Just kind of just helpless. You know, and then I get through it, and then
I am in a space where I would agree, Paulette. I think there's been moments that I feel like I'm in a bad novel, that we're in a pandemic and we're trying to advocate for children and staff in the safest way where no one has ever had to do. And yet we're experiencing we've never seen this before. This is the first for so many things. And I think as it takes my breath away, I also want to exhale and say, we do have the ability to impact our children and this community, and we can advocate and we can champion and we can move forward together. Because if not us, then no one, right? So I feel hopeful on the one hand, because I know we are doing the right work and we have to be courageous in that. And yet I'm also, as a grown-up, so worried about what children are seeing. Like they're watching us. Yeah.
Well, we've had some really amazing conversations this week with our two teenagers who are, they're awake and looking and seeing and wondering about a lot.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy for me to not get worked up by things I can't really affect, but yeah, I mean, my kids were very interested, which,
Yeah.
you know, if nothing else means it's on their mind.
Yeah, it's unprecedented, you know?
I really agree with Rhonda. It's just, I find it hard to
Yeah.
be surprised by anything these days. Like,
Yeah.
why not? Why wouldn't they?
What makes me think they need something different?
Chapter 20
It's
of
like
a
the
bad
crazier it
novel,
gets,
right?
and just, wow,
Boy,
feel like an extra in a bad movie.
yeah. Yeah.
So, we were able to get Liza.
And Matt, I haven't seen Lisa.
Okay.
Tyler, have you got Lisa yet?
Lisa, sorry. Speaking Liza, no,
It
sorry.
looks like
I should say, sorry.
you're gonna ask the tech person, the tech school
I,
board.
right. Irony at its finest, right?
I appreciate that.
So,
Okay.
these are unprecedented times, and there's a word that is getting worn out through the dictionary. And I'd like to give you some very important information. And we all bought into 2021 was, going to be the year, and I'm here to let you know that it does not come with a receipt. So we're here, we bought it, we thought 2021 was supposed to be this great change, but we are the change. It's not 2021. And so that was shared with me. The other thing I'd like to share with you, and I don't see, again, police see ourselves as teachers. What we get to do, though, is we get to convene and listen to so many people. Some doing it well, some people that are learning as they go. And what we are learning is, it's in times like this that you always, again, go back to the feeding of each other. How are you feeding each other information? What do you know, where you know? And then stand really, really conscious and being self-aware. And when you don't know, the best thing to do is ask another question. And so we find that really keeps this group that's making big decisions together, and it gets more voices. And also looking and seeing and understanding that the reason we're here talking about policy isn't necessarily all about numbers. Like we have this many people saying this, but it's about listening and doing an understanding of both and getting them to start first where they see. And it's, for lack of a better word, easier to get pressured into those. And so we see that, and then people have to back out, and it's sometimes even more difficult because then you lose this thing called, that bank of trust gets smaller. And it doesn't mean, too, what we share people is like, be sure that given where we are, we're not in the culture of quote unquote being right, but getting it. So what does that look like when we say we want to get this right? In terms of how we go about process, inclusion, business, discussions. And then the other thing, like I said, you have to feed each other information and support. And I was seeing feeling tonight. And then the other thing too is the smaller the store, the easier it is to stay on target. Meaning that we have to feed, and I'm sure Preston's gonna love this, but it has to be like, how are you gonna feed the superintendent that has to make decisions from every different angle? And so what does that look like for support of your leaders, superintendent, Diane, your principals? Because what we learn as we dig through the layers, teachers are feeling pressure, principals are feeling pressure. So we have to just be cognizant that says, hey, we have to look at the entire system and understand that their needs are going to be different and some of them similar. So we're learning and seeing this, and we know, quote unquote, people know it. But unless you intentionally like name it, like write it down, you have to say, hey, how is this getting taken care of? Or how is this being addressed? Right? I mean, and we're learning new things too about, wait a minute. So if the transportation department, what does that look like for the bus driver? Like really being that intentional. So in all of these things, that's the beautiful things that we're learning about what that looks like, what that sounds like. And at the end of the day, like I said, keeping that information centered as much as possible. And so that when it goes, everyone's kind of on the same page. Because what we also see is that people would rather hear the same thing rather than hear nothing or the wrong thing. I'll say that again. They'd rather hear the same thing rather than to hear nothing or the wrong thing, quote unquote. And so in
You know, we don't have a landline either. I mean, so we have no internet. We had power the whole time. Well,
Both a landline and cell service.
so is everything still out for you?
Yeah, it's finally,
Okay.
cell service isn't up, but
Well, why don't we get going again?
Okay.
We'll either get Lisa or we won't, so.
Can you tell me what you can see on the, do you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, good.
Okay. Yes. All right.
And if I get too muffled, Rhonda, you can just, right,
Thank
like
you.
point to your ear, and that way I want to make sure I project.
okay.
Dude, it's beautiful. Mass
So
that I'm
hard.
wearing. Beautiful.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Impressive.
Okay, so we just want to do an honoring of the land, people, and water acknowledgement. And what we kind of do with this is we already talked about it last time. Like we did a deeper dive, but this one is more of like kind of thinking about ways where land acknowledgements act in space. So this is usually where I say, you know, wherever we are, it's not just about the land, like a historical context and like who is original stewards, but like what are we doing today, which we talked about last time. So we just constantly want to bring that back into space. So currently, right now, I am literally on Lake Washington, and want to honor the water that has given us life, either through our drinking it or just being there. We need it. And then the original stewards, which Duwamish and Muckleshoot are originally the Duwamish was ancestral. Muckleshoot is the ones that are federally recognized in this area. But acknowledging the land that is coming in, I know that you all are very coupled by different tribes. So if anybody would like to say anything, but we want to call into action and not just be like oh yeah, check, but how are we making this something that is actionary? Like this is what we need to think about, because there's lots of history that's been let go of. And this is really disrupting that. When we do land acknowledgements, is disrupting this pattern of like just business as usual, where we're actually being able to kind of think about the space we're in and how we're honoring it. So would anybody like to say anything around that? Like if you know, we did a lot of work around like whose land you're on. Is there anything any reflections from last time to this time?
Well, I guess I would like to honor the Nisqually tribe and the work that we do in our farm, especially as a school district. I think that's a great way that we honor the tribe and work in partnership with them, and really appreciate the restoration that they've done on behalf of the habitat and the salmon, and really the education of our children.
Thank you. And I know there's a partnership with that too, so. Right, anything else? Okay. I can't read the room, so I'm kind of looking at Brad.
I think it's out to look at.
On camera this time?
Yeah, all right.
No hiding.
I just want to say, first of all, that I'm not native, but what I have learned is that when we do those acknowledgements, it means so much. Because historically they lost so much. I would just encourage you to share that piece, and it doesn't have to take over, but what seems small to us isn't small to others. So thank you for the practice, Donna, at least opening that up. Again, we learn every day. And so I just want to go quickly through community agreements, practices. And I do love the word practice. I'm going to continue to talk about that because, policy, procedure, those things are great. But what is the practice? And so here's some things you want to continually practice, right? And so stay engaged. Don't let your heart and mind check out. And I just want to, quick as possible, understand when we say don't let your heart and mind check out. You could have two professors, because I don't want to pick on teachers, because my wife's a teacher, have same book, same students, etc., same amount of time, but we continually get different results. And what we do know is the human spirit in which we do something is different, right? And so I want us to remember that part when we say don't let your heart and mind check out. It is truly different. And we've all had, whether it's mechanics, whether it's doctors, or whether it's teachers, we know the difference. They're practicing. And so I really want us to be conscious right now, because this is a huge need right now as we are separated. And it does cause us. I mean, we are naturally communal beings. And so we just need to understand that and keep our heart. And sometimes our traditions sometimes cut us off from seeing people. And so we have to keep that. And so keep our mind checked in. And I would add that stay curious. Stay curious. Why do they feel that way? What does that look like? And it doesn't mean you have to agree. It's you have to listen for understanding. And experience discomfort. Hey, this is great. Why I wore this shirt so you guys don't see me sweat out. And I just want to get, and here's my personal thing is I want to be better at being more honest and nice. And I love that. And someone gifted that to me. If I can bring Brene Brown in the room, I think that also is a form of kindness. And if you think about our most successful organizations, it's done through more so honesty than niceness, right? And I mean, I know we're in Cowboys, but dare I say the heydays of the Seahawks, I mean, that feedback is important for that orchestra, that band, that teacher, that student. And so lead into that discomfort and say, hey, tell me more about that. Felicia and I was having a conversation the other day, and, in the heat of the moment when we were going through stuff, I openly said powwow, right? Like, not okay. I know that. But being okay with that and understanding too that is the purpose of growth and leadership, is to have the courage to get in there, be a little discomfort, learn, and be like, oh, got it, and let's keep going. And when we're called in, have the spirit of leaning in and grace. And you're like, man, thanks for that. And that's how we get better. And then speak your truth. There are some things that, we don't know. This pandemic has proven that what we thought, and it changes. This is my truth, and we've always done it that way, right? We now know that when we say we've always done it that way, that is a telltale sign of we need to do some investigation, right? And I don't know if you remember the quote that was gifted to me from my good friends in Lake Washington, but we have to interrogate tradition, because it was said by whom, done by whom, and whom had the power to put it in place as we grow. And then also, tradition is what? Peer pressure from dead people. So what does that look like? Right? Beautiful. Love that.
I love that.
Yes. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And so being okay with and honoring the work that people have done, but interrogating it. What does that look like? And how does that help us continue to grow? Right? There's a reason we're in this room together that looks like this now. And then expect and accept non-closure. And there's going to be times too that it is important to have non-closure, because to come to an abrupt decision just to quote unquote go into action, again, may not be the choice. It might push us into quote unquote being right as opposed to getting it right. And again, old saying, measure twice, cut once. And intent versus impact, we're familiar with that. And I have to learn this too. And Lord forbid, sometimes with my wife, I'm like, but that's not even what I meant. How many times I said, and it doesn't matter what I meant. This is where she is. This is what it felt like. And then I have to then be self-aware enough that it doesn't matter. And if it goes to being right, do I truly get what I want? No, you don't get it right. I'll probably end up doing this anyway, and getting another, right? Or whatever it is. But whatever it is, when we get into that space, we end up truly getting further apart when it comes to getting to being right, right? And so if someone's impacted, learn from that. And say, oh, I could see how you took it that way, or, right? And then it opens source of more understanding. And so learn from that in any relationship. And then referencing Glenn Singleton's courageous conversations about race. The last time we had up the compass, you guys remember the compass before compass? And usually certain people enter, white folks enter into the intellect side. And then how to make sure we visit the whole room. So this is how I'm making sense with my head, which is totally fine. But then how do I move into some form of action? Or now I got to go check my values and beliefs. What do I really believe about gay and lesbian students? What do I really believe about Native American students? And that is healthy, and that is okay. And then because it keeps us curious and to be better. And I'm looking at you because I remember you sharing about once you get the data, you guys say, hey, we're quote unquote good, but what's the next level of good, right? And you're able to move a school once you became more and more aware and intentional about the work. So, and that comes from being courageous. So we know that it can happen, has happened, and this is that next incredible opportunity. And that's the practice. You just continue to practice that, and know too that this and everything else is like a bath. We'll have to do it every day, most of us, without doubt. All right. Please, on you. I'm going to take a sip of water, pass out in this minute.
So
Hey,
this
Brad, I do want to ask, this is Lisa. I know that you have talked about the intent and the impact. I'd like to also talk about, perhaps not in this board meeting, but maybe we can also talk about the calling out versus calling in as part of that courageous conversation that I attend. I think there's a huge difference between those two, and in terms of the inclusion piece of that and the equity piece of our conversation.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because these practices are meant to build relationships with. And to your point, where when we talk about calling in versus calling out, there's when it's really of a conversation. If we're calling in, that's based on relationships. That's based off growth and support of each other. And like, hey, you might have not intended it, but let's talk about it. Or calling out is like, it feels good at that moment. It's like, blah. But it doesn't, it kind of cancels things and it doesn't really build relationships. And it doesn't build through that work. So I'm so glad you said that because there is a big difference between the two. And it feels good at that moment to call someone out because you're like, "Blah," but there's no intentionality around a relationship. And to this work, it's a lot of relationship building that is needed.
I like that, Felice. And I actually, I think the last time that we met, Rhonda and I, Rhonda mentioned something about, speaking your truth. It becomes a little bit of a negative connotation, right? But if you are actually doing a calling in and speaking your truth, there's that sense of trust and building that relationship between those two people that are having this conversation. And in this case, it's the community and the district, right? Having that calling in, getting their partnership, and then speaking the truth. And so I agree with you on that.
Yeah,
it's about the relationship.
Sorry about that. I like to add that where speaking your truth should never be weaponized.
Yeah.
Speaking your truth and it's weaponized, that's not really speaking your truth. That's still a calling out. So, I agree. I'm so glad that you connected all those dots.
And I will say too, there's an art to it, and I apologize, and I forget who shared that with me, and it was the first time I've heard it. And again, thank you for bringing this up. And this is important if we're going to get better, because there is no quote unquote again being right. And they said if you're wanting people, an organization, etc., to go to a new place, they're more apt to stay if they're invited or if they go there. But if you take them there, they're less likely to stay. And I was like, man. But when you think about that, it's, we all have children, whatever. When you quote unquote tell and push people into a place, they might comply. And we know compliance is passive resistance, which doesn't bode well for anyone, but the invitation and the inquiry, people actually to go there, not only will they more apt to stay, but they might invite someone else. And if they get lost, at least they know how to get back, right? And so thank you, Liza, for bringing that in that artwork of calling people in. And lastly, I want to give also a non-example is we have people that watch a film, grab knowledge, and to police's point, they'll weaponize it. Oh, I'm gonna tell you what that is. That's what this is. And it's again, that's the heart piece. How are you sharing and presenting the information? So important because we want all to be shared. And it doesn't mean that we all have to agree. And some may eat slower and quicker than others, right? But how is it presented? And so there's so many beautiful things in terms of the way this has been done, can be done. And again, the heart and spirit, I love where we are.
So Felice and Brad, can I ask a question? Because some of the language, like calling people in, I don't know that I'm as familiar with that terminology. So I appreciate whenever you define that, because then we can start to use that. I love that. I'm curious about the idea of when you call people in a group, like time, right? People want like an answer, or like we get there, like we want to do this and we should be done by this, right? By this time. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of building relationships over time and trust, and how that all plays into really organizations doing this super well? And we doing this well, personally and professionally. I'm just curious.
Go ahead, Felice. I'll commit.
So calling out was no intention of like having a relationship. It's more of like a counsel, like you've hurt me, how dare you? And there's no conversation. It's like a ugh. Where calling in is definitely a conversation. It's like a hey, you might have not known, or let me help you, or like how can I, just like an interruption of something. And usually with that, it's building all of those other practices, because those practices are integrated. It's like at one point you're like, I'm going to speak my truth. I'm going to call in. I'm going to speak my truth, and then I'm going to know about intention and impact. So recognizing someone's intention is completely might be different from someone's impact. And how do you have a deeper conversation about it versus going, oh, I'm sorry, get over it, versus like, let's talk, because this is a learning opportunity. Like I didn't know that, and how do I learn from that? And that's where that curiosity is. It's like, oh, in that relationship of, hey, I want to build a relationship here. And a lot of times, when we don't have those conversations, people get minimized, or they feel like they're not heard or valued. And that may never be the intention. Might be someone's like, oh, I didn't mean it, and then go in a place of shame or guilt, and that never works out either. Shame and guilt are not friends of anyone. They kind of stop things. So when we're able to have these tough conversations, that's when those relationships start getting built, and then trust and all of that kind of moves forward, and you start seeing each other differently. And that's where that real, like, that's the diamond, that's the gem, because that's where those are the work together, the journey, because this is a journey. You're not like, I wish I could give you all of the magic like potion to make this all like happen. It's a journey. And in teams and organization, it's kind of supporting each other and coming into this practice of like, we're accountable to each other out of love or relationship, not out of punitive. So accountability should be able to be not about punity, like you're wrong, how dare you. It should be about accountability, like we are building a relationship and we want to support each other. That's how organizations move. But I also want to say it takes 5 years for any type of thing. I know, like a true change of culture. But with more people that are practicing, the deeper it will become part of the culture, not just a practice. It's something that is valued, supported, and move forward. Now, smaller teams, they work much faster, but we're talking about organization. It takes about 5 years. But teams, when they start realizing and practicing all of this, that's where the movement happens. And that's where you lean into like the racial equity mindset, where it's the first thing you think about, not the last thing. Does that help?
Yes, that I'm taking notes frantically. Thank you. That is great.
And I would like to say, this is where you got to give yourself compassion and grace, And going back to your purpose, but passion and compassion, grace, because I've been doing this work for a long time, and I like stepped in it big time last week, like horrifically, like completely. I did not live by my practices, and I was like, what was I doing? Because it was a lot going on, and you just got to give yourself some grace and compassion and go, all right, I've learned. How do I lean back into that relationship?
So I'll do a CFU real quick. Does that feel good, sound good for everyone? Yeah. I'm sorry, I said CFU. Checking for understanding.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Lisa, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you give me your definition of calling in? How would you say it?
Yeah. So calling in is something like a person or a group or a community that doesn't understand my culture. Instead of calling them out because they have a different perception or probably don't have enough knowledge of my culture as a Filipino, I call them in to understand what my culture is. Calling out is when someone say they offended me and I needed to kind of just say, hey, I felt like, and blah blah blah, and I know that that's not the intent, but I want you to know that you hurt me. That's calling out with kindness. Calling in is having that person understand my position. There's a big difference. That's my definition.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
And I want to use an example really quick because, again, and I love it because, and this was back when Chris and you were doing work with Dr. Shiraki Holly about cultural responsive teaching. And I want to put it into context. He told a story in regards to being able, and again, to Liza's point, about giving context and thought to others, even though the impact might not feel good. And so an example would be, and I'm just making some assumptions. Diane invites me to our church. It's a Catholic church. I grew up in North Carolina, right? Presbyterian church. I go in, the priest says something great, and I jump up, amen! And everybody's like, what in the world? Right? And Diane's like, Brad, what is wrong? Right? And she calls me out within the group because I disrupt. But at the same time, that is me showing support, right? And so we see that happen in organizations where people have different ways of being and showing. But when we actually sit down and she says, hey, I want to talk to you, man. Do you know? And they're like, oh. And then I also have an opportunity to say, and again, it doesn't make what I did necessarily right within that context, but it gives me a chance to do some understanding, right? And we both have opportunity to learn. And now when I go back, at least and they might let me in. Right? but that is a way in terms of calling in within context. The intention still may be, impact might not be. Right. I love that. Sorry. And yes, you can invite me to your church.
Going to mass on Sunday.
Would you like to go over these, Brad? The levels of oppression?
You're maskless, so I'm putting it on you now.
So we just wanted to kind of reacquaint you with the definitions of levels of oppression, just because we're going to talk about that today, and just examples that you might have seen, like, and since we talked about, we also want to know, like, have you seen any of these happen? And I think we have seen some of these happen across the nation, but there's individual, where it's prejudgment, bias, discrimination. So we wanted to know if you had seen an example since the last time we talked, or anything that has bubbled up, or aha moments about individual levels of oppression. Do you have any examples?
It's okay, I got the first.
Oh,
Any
the
examples,
quarantine.
be it, well,
Yeah,
well, let
we
me help you
never
out.
see anybody.
Yeah, well, we get an opportunity to see and hear about a lot, either via email,
Mhm.
Facebook. And this is a great opportunity for us to teach people that there's another thing you can do with a smart device, like actually call. And in these times, it's worth a phone call because so many things can be taken out of context,
That is
especially
so
when people are in a
true.
different, right, spirit. So seeing, feeling any of that individual basis? You know, I can't even see all of your face expressions, but I know under that mask.
I just,
So I'm just wondering, I mean, I missed the last session at work, but I mean, on an individual level, at any rate, isn't that at some level kind of built into everybody?
Mhm.
I mean, I see those as what I kind of conceive as a lot of human nature things there. So, I mean, and that's probably what makes them such a big problem. I mean, things you're raised in ways, things are built in through your own culture and
I-
the rest of it.
I was trying to articulate. So it seems like every decision this year that we're making are really, they're big, hairy deals. Like there's no like decision that's really easy. And every time we make a decision together as a board and superintendent, leadership moves, there is a sense that people know what other people are, so everybody seems to have the right answer, right?
Mhm.
And it's based on assumptions and it's based on that own person's individual. So that idea of prejudging, like
Mhm.
I know that for this decision,
Mhm.
but everybody knows best for all the decisions. So it's just, it's absolutely stunning. I think in my whole career, it's just every even small decisions that we can make. It just seems like people are struggling with their own, I don't know, oppressive atmosphere, right? Lack of freedom, lack of, being able to do what we normally can do. And, people are prejudging things even before, not even having all the information or.
Well, even worse, you can choose your information now.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So.
Which goes back to the earlier statement we first started, right, about information.
Yeah.
How are you feeding each other
Right.
information?
Right.
Very important. Thank you. That's a good.
But I don't know if what I'm expressing would be levels of oppression, right? I don't know how it's linked to that individually, but I
It's
know.
actually
Go ahead.
it's institutional. What you're describing is exactly a perfect example of institutional,
Okay.
where people like they don't know, they don't have anything to point at, but they're like, oh, it feels this way, but they are not able to cut, and they make it sound like this is a racist act, sexist or capitalist or whatever that is, but it is sometimes it's just a policy that uh, unintentionally harms, or a decision that unintentionally harms instead of like interrupting it, and it's just like it is what it is, and it's interrupting like, okay, what are the thoughts, like with institutional sometimes it's like, was it intentional? Because a lot of times institutional is unintentional, and it becomes this thing that people want to say it's individual, like you're against me,
Right.
but it's an institutional level of oppression.
So then, Felice, what would an individual level of oppression? What would that?
Yeah.
Would that be individually?
Like this yes, individually, like microaggressions. This is where acts of like whatever ism that is in there it's done individually. And I want to say before we go into a deeper conversation around that, everybody has bias.
Yeah.
So if you don't have bias, please write a book. I have a lot of people I can sell that to and make all of us money. We all have bias. And the interesting thing about bias is not that we need to like get rid of it, it's what we do with it. And my when you realize like where your bias is coming up, that's where you can like engage it, think differently about it. So a quick story, I'm a professor. When I was able to be in FACE, I would work with and I was at a community college, which we had a lot of Running Start students in the course. And we always would get this list of if somebody was did a misdemeanor around sex conduct. And we wouldn't know any details, just like, hey, be aware, this person shouldn't be close to minors. And in a room of a lot of Running Start students, you're like trying to figure out how to do that dynamic. My bias went straight to this person. It was a young man. This young man harmed a 3-year-old. And so I went to my bias and I acted on that bias because I talk about bias all day long. I was like, I'm fine, and I'm okay with my bias. What ended up happening is I didn't realize how I was treating that person. And I was kind of pushing him to like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm here, class, we're all here. But, I was kind of moving him, like working, like engaging him with my bias in front. When another student had said something, they were like, hey, something had happened with them. And I was like, why didn't you come to me? I would support you. I'd work with you. And that student said, I saw how you treated that student, and I didn't want to be treated that way. So that student, I was like, what? And I had to sit and think, oh my gosh, I was leading with my bias. I didn't even realize it was harming the rest of the students in the class. So I had to stop, interrupt myself, and engage that, because I didn't realize like I was creating my body language. I would even move my body to like put him to the side of the room and not engage him. So I talked with him, and he told me the story of he just graduated, dated a student that was in Running Start. The parent, he had turned 18. The parent got upset. It was like 10 years ago, before laws were different, and basically the parent did not like them two together. So put charges on him as soon as he turned 18. And I was like, oh, my bias was running, and I engaged it so much. I didn't listen, I didn't hear, I didn't think, I just engaged, and I didn't realize the harm I was doing. So it's not that I'm like, oh, get rid of that bias, because I'm still like, oh, there is a bias around, sexual predators in my mind that I need to work on. But I had to unpack, not only was it how I was treating that one student, but how it affected the whole class. And when I'm able to talk through it and engage it differently, I'm able to spot it differently and act on it differently and kind of think about it differently. So that's what individual looks like, is not only, hey, I have bias, but how we're acting on that bias. That's where microaggressions happen. That's where like unintentional but harm, like the face-to-face slurs. Sometimes it is extremely harm, like calling like with the harm intended. That can be individual act. Like those could be keying of a car. It could be lots of different acts on with leading with bias or discrimination. Does that kind of help a little bit on the examples?
Helpful, really helpful.
So we know that people feel it, and like sometimes the individual's easy to kind of point at, even though people might not understand it, but it's easier to point at. Where institutional's like in the air, right? It's like, oh, it's a policy, that was not the intent, or a procedure that accidentally harmed. So like the best example of an institutional is like financial aid. I don't know about you all working with your high schoolers, but financial aid sometimes is a strong institutional barrier based on income that might not really reflect on what's happening in the home. And it's a policy, a federal policy. It was meant to be equitable, but it wasn't designed with pockets of people thought of. So it was like thinking of like the most destitute, but destitute is like a bigger conversation. And so something like, well, this is how we've always done it. That's usually an institutional level of oppression. How our buildings are built. Sometimes we put stairs in front of our buildings because we want to make it look grand, but we don't realize that that's an institutional like unintentional level of oppression for people in wheelchairs to get to the building. They have to go up behind to go to a ramp or whatever that might look like. Or we have one elevator where there might be multiple. So it's designs of our buildings. It's like something that we never thought about that could unintentionally cause harm to bathrooms, especially with we have more transgender students coming in, not having a space for gender neutral bathroom, and that becomes another institutionalized example that creates and it's not someone going, ha, deal with it. It's more of like, oh, yeah, this is how we've always done it. And, how do I think about that differently? So those are examples of institution. Does anybody, any other examples you'd like to share?
I just want to put proper, and I'm going to go back and affirm and validate Jeff, right? Because you said, well, everyone has bias, and you said it with some hesitancy, right? But you did it anyway, and I want us to model that. And when someone says something you might be thinking or not, and it's not to lift certain people up as being savior, but we have to understand this is sensitive work. So how do we, again, not being right, but validating the effort. Thank you for leaning into a conversation. I don't know if you felt 100% sure about what you were going to say, but it was like, oh, does it? Good, right? And I felt that, but you leaned in anyway. And that's the whole point of trying to have these conversations, is to stay curious. And just really quick, just some psychological facts. When people enter a room, especially here within America, the first thing they look for or recognize is race. Everybody, period. And this is research at the University of Water. The second thing is gender. And then we go back to what Felice said. How then do you act and operate? That's the difference. I walk into a meeting, I see someone that may fit or a certain type, get it, right? Do I go and sit at the table, or do I find somewhere else to sit? Am I intentionally avoiding, right? Because you better believe people know and feel, right? Like, let's take some stereotypes of what we hear every day, i.e. larger women of color. We get labeled what? Angry, but we hear it all the time, and it's so farthest from the truth. But if we are thinking and saying that they want the same thing I want, and this is them showing up and advocating. And then we have to think, how do we capture their voice in a way that doesn't have to show up to the point it is where it is, right? And that's all work we have. So how do we act on that bias? And the other way too, we do it in modeling is, Jeff shows up in a suit. His treatment when he shows up in the main office shouldn't be any different than if someone shows up in dressed as in a burqa in Muslim attire, right? A female. So it's how are we acting out? It isn't always that easy negative. It's also affirming and lifting up, right? These differences in treatment. So it's really being conscious about that. So we see those things. So that's the individual. And then thanks again for like asking questions, staying curious, staying in our practice. Sorry, Felice.
Oh, no, please don't apologize. I'm so thankful that you're.
I'm very used to being wrong, Brad. I have no problem diving into something without looking. I can do that all day long.
No, appreciate it. Love it.
So is there any other examples that anybody would like to share before we go to structural? So structural is the one that we don't even see. It's not, it's like not even it's like we don't, it is the air. It's not in the air, it's the air. It's the things that we're like, I would say, a lot of our foundation, like our education is based on structural things that we just never thought about until we have to think about it and the way things are. And this can be like historical or even current isms, or like institutional isms that have just been built up. For example, like redlining, we'll talk more about this, but our schools are developed, our school districts are developed based on a lot of redlining. and and as well as like economics. So that is like a systemic structural thing. Also, like a lot of things have been on genocide and enslaved and Jim Crow and like the Japanese internment camp, that there's been layers, bricks that we might not even recognize because it's not the day to day, but things have been built on top of. And until we are able to kind of go, oh, that's how that origin of that happened, or that's where that came from. That's the unpacking of going, oh, that's what we, so institutional is like the product of, the structure is like the what has been going on and is underlining, and it happens. It's like so weird because people, they don't know, they can feel it, but they don't know how to put their finger on it. Like, oh, that's what it is, until we talk about this historical context. So the best way I would say this is like things that we don't even see that are acknowledged until we are like, oh, I didn't realize, like the education system, who had access in education when it first started like a couple hundred years ago, and then as time rolled on, who had access. So a lot of our systems are built on access. We talk about that a lot, because who had access like even 50 years ago is very different from now, and who's in our districts and why, and our structures and built on that. That's all structural levels of oppression.
And you all talked about that the last time, I believe, and it was, I want to say, Paulette, is it, I might not get it right, is it, I was looking for my other book, is it Up the River? No.
Up the line.
Up the line, there it is. What does that mean? What does that look like? And if someone's up the line, how is that different from being, I don't know, down the line?
It was different.
Yeah.
It's still different today.
It still is, yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes until we know the origin, we just kind of like, oh well, let's put holes in it, or like go up the line a little bit, or up the river a little bit, until we get to the actual main part where it has been poisoned.
It's up the line, not up the river.
Up the line.
Okay.
The line.
All right, up the line, not up the river.
There's probably some of that too. But
Are we ready to go to the next slide? This is where we talk about white supremacy. I know we introduced this a little bit. This is like we're gonna keep unpacking this. Again, we're not talking about white supremacists. We're talking about white supremacy culture. And this is a culture we live in, especially in the context of the United States, that positions white people, or whiteness, I would like to say, that associated them with whiteness as ideal. And this is where, a lot of, this is not intentional. No one's like, ha, 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 ha. It is where our systems have been built up because who had power or at that time. And so we just kind of built blocks on top of that, and foundational pieces that have been moving up. And I would like to say that it's like, no one feels like there are white supremacists or extreme groups that feel that they might be superior to, but this is more of like just how our systems kind of like laid out, and then had like upheld unintentionally. And we all have like unintentionally done it, just because that's how we've learned to do things. And so we look at it as a system that can operate despite good intentions of the community and members. So my colleague talks about it. There's two analogies. One, it's not the shark, it's the water. Like we're all in the water together, and we're more fearful of like the shark, but really it's the water that's like kind of contaminated. Or my Matthew also talks about it as, if we look at it as an ecosystem of where the trees, individuals, institutions are like a hill, structural is like the water, but white supremacy is the soil, and it kind of holds everything in place. And until we kind of go, oh, the soil might be a little contaminated, and not realize what it looks, and it's caused harm. And with white supremacy concept, or like a top, not concept, but culture. It really is talking about, oh, how did we get to a place that unintentionally turn that around, where those levels of oppression kind of played in place. So how levels of oppression work is they're all kind of unintentionally holding up a standard, and the standard, we're now realizing that it was never meant for it to be the way it is, but it has been. So there's a standard of what is good, what is great, and those that are not in that category have seen as deficit. So for example, English language in the United States, if you don't speak English, therefore you're not good. You need to learn, and it's a deficit, like something's wrong with you because you don't, versus, oh, look, you're brilliant that you speak multiple languages, or your ability to hold multiple languages. So it's kind of wrestling between what has been put in front of us, like beauty, like a certain standard of beauty, a certain weight, a certain look has been set as standard as good and like best, versus, oh, all of our bodies are perfect, and how do we kind of think differently about how the system has kind of put us to a place of like even not even appreciating our own bodies because of the system. Does that make sense? Let me go deeper.
No, I actually, sorry, it's Lisa again, Felice.
Oh, please
I
don't
think
apologize.
for me, my understanding as well of white supremacy is that the belief that the white people think that the perception of them being a superior race, and that could actually be perceived by other racial and ethnic groups as an exclusion of other races because of their belief of being the superior race. Is that?
Yeah, but it's also whiteness, not, so I'm going to say whiteness. So there, I'm going to focus on like whiteness because it's upheld by everyone, but whiteness as being seen as good and best. So it could be, because I think when people hear that, like, oh, white people are the best, it's whiteness. And also, we all uphold white supremacy. Like, we all uphold it, and it's unpacking that and learning, oh, this is where that comes in. But yeah, it's whiteness that is upheld.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to give some context, and I want to again practice being extremely honest. This, for Felice and I, hours on the phone when we have a conversation. And to points made is, we know that it's everywhere in terms of the term. And for us to be here tonight, and to not create a space where we as leaders can model having a conversation or interrogating and thinking about it. Not only is it dehumanizing to the people that are waiting on us to create this great system, but not doing within itself, we're acting in a way of fragility. And and police are holding us accountable, like, this is what we see every day. News, good, bad, or indifferent, of how it's presented, whether it's in groups or whether it's, like me, whether your students in here are getting fed via TikTok or what have you. I think Jeff and that, our kids are having these conversations. And so we need to understand, what does that mean? What does that look like? And when we hear the word, or the words, what does our body physically do? Like, this is the part of self-awareness. Like, we really got, like, for me, like, I'm like, okay, breathe. I'm just being transparent. Because what I don't want is people to feel like I felt like when I've been in so many meetings, right? What I do want is, man, this is uncomfortable. But I know the relationship and the love of kids is what's at the center of we're having this conversation. So whether it's the principal or the staff member, as a person of color, or if a student, because then like, how do we create a space where that focus is on their well-being? And it's not to take away from, right? Because that mindset is either or, and we want to shift that to both and. And we brought that to the center. So around that, for us not to talk about it, for me, is the same feeling of, back in the day we used to be colorblind, right? Like, that's a disservice to people in their walk. So with that, it's what are we doing? What are we hearing? And then how are we supporting the opportunity for all to be in this, in this space and being aware of.
I kind of want to build on what you had to say, and this hit home as my daughter was sent home from college between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and she was doing her class online, and she's studying elementary education and SEL, being a teacher specializing in English as a second language. And she actually has hit such a place of depression because she feels horrible about the fact that she's white and that she has privilege. And I think it's awesome that she recognizes that, but where's that balance? I liked what you said about coming together and supporting, and how do we help those kids, those who go from just the absolute opposite extreme and feel terrible about their own existence, that she doesn't even feel good in her own skin because she feels like she is, this personification of white supremacy. And if you know this child, she is the most kind, generous person. She would never, ever do anything that would hurt anyone. So just trying to help walk her through that and understanding she's enveloped in this conversation, like this is the world and the work that she's doing. So
I love your questions. I want to say something about, like, bring it back to levels of oppression, and then I will so answer your question. So if we look at like white supremacy or any type of supremacy, when we talk about levels of oppression, no matter what that looks like, it's age, race, gender, sexual orientation, any of those, disabilities, and we look at that as like the disease, like the supremacy of that, like the thinking of that is what is meant to be good, seen as good and the best. And the outcome of that is, the symptoms of that is fragility. But for people that are living, not just white fragility, we're talking about just fragility, but for people that are told to leave something at the door, that is where the conversation is. The flip side of that symptom is that people are taught to leave something at the door to be taken in by the norm. So I might leave something really good about my culture at the door. It might be something about being, like hi, my name is Felice. I actually grew up with a speech impediment. And so when you hear me talk really fast, it's because I'm trying to hide it when I'm really nervous. And those are something I leave at the door. I don't bring it with me because I think, oh, if I have a speech impediment, you hear it, you'll think my intelligence is low. So I've taught to minimize that about myself versus going, oh, how do I kind of see that as, hey, this is why I'm doing it. I hope you embrace me for who I am, kind of thing. So that's where the symptoms are. But the product is privilege. And the thing about, we don't talk about privilege is it's not privilege is good or bad. That is definitely where the binary of like doesn't help anybody. Like you're good or bad. We're humans. We're complex. We're not about good or bad. We're everything in between. And when we have privilege, the best example I could say, if you have economic privilege, give me your money. I'll rid you of your privilege, and you can feel better about that one moment, and then you won't have money. So I will take that off your plate if you want me to. I will use it. So privilege is not about like, ha, 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 I have it. It's what we do with it. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I can show you a clip in a bit, but like, the thing about privilege, it's not about having it. You shouldn't feel bad. We all have like power in this dynamic. You're all school leader, you're school board members. We have some privilege. We have, I have economic privilege. I also have title privilege. I don't feel bad about that. It's what I do with that. Do I keep it and like, oh, it's all mine? Or do I use that? Do I use that to interrupt something that when I see someone Do I use it as an accomplice? Do I use it as someone to support someone that does not have systemic privilege? And I want to use systemic privilege because systemics are what the system structures is what keep that narrative going. Usually when individuals figure out like, oh gosh, I have privilege, what do I do with it? It's not about them individually, like, oh, I have systemic privilege, what do I do with it? Like it might be, a good example of this is if you go to someone that is without a home and they're on the street asking for money, do you give them the money going, here you go? Or do you use it like, look, I have money, you don't. This is how I want you to use it. You know, I have the money, you go because I know more. I hope none of you do that, but that's misuse of privilege. Where privilege is like, I have it, what do I do to better, engage and be thoughtful? Does that help a little bit? Because I feel like privilege, the conversation of privilege has been about good or bad. That's not what privilege is. And having privilege is not about, people are not going, ha, 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 I have privilege. It's people going, oh my gosh, what do I do with it? How can I utilize it to support people or to think differently on the systems?
So then I guess moving forward, this is my question. How do we have that conversation around privilege without, for instance, the one thing that really was just tearing at her heart is she has a friend who says, I can't, who is struggling and had some depression, and my daughter was trying to be there to listen to her. And she says, you can't ever understand my problems. You have the privilege of having a dad. You're privileged. So therefore she discounted, and my daughter's like, what do I do with that? My heart is, intent is good. I can't, the fact that I have a dad in my life, that makes me privileged and then therefore a bad person in this person's eyes. So how do we change as we're moving forward and we're doing this work, how do we make sure that our children and our staff make sure that they like express this idea of using the things that you have to bring up and to benefit our community and each other, rather than that being, something that makes each of us feel oppressed or intimidated or guilty for the things that we have been gifted. I mean, we need to recognize that, and I do believe we use those privileges to benefit others, but sometimes, it's part of who we are, like Jeff just said, and we want that to be good, but we don't want to necessarily feel like we can't live in our own skin either.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, go back to the practices, like staying engaged, like knowing, okay, yeah, I do have privilege, and going to intention impact conversation of like, I know my intention is not to harm, you with my privilege or anyone else. How, like, this is, I see the impact on you. I want to build you're my friend. Like, I want to have a real conversation about how that affects you. And also I'm going to explore how I can utilize that better to support not only you, but for me to know how to use my privilege differently.
I'm going to quote, because we were just this conversation with my department the other day, and we're also reading Cast, and we're reading, and I see there Kenny X's book, and of course he's been all over the place because people are asking that same question. And when you have, whether it's privilege or money, isn't about necessarily feeling bad about what you have, but getting into place about how do you use that to improve. And what we find is that the mindset of thinking by me giving you money, quote unquote, is going to make you better, or me, but what we find, it's reciprocal. By me being a contributor, by me giving, actually helps me, if that makes sense. If we think about it from, God forbid, a Christmas, but like the giving of something, gifts or whatever it is, with meaning, right? Not doing it to rid ourselves of our guilt, because it goes back to the heart. But my giving up, my contribution, my leveling of policy, my inclusion of AP, my whatever kindergarten, whatever that looks, my hiring, whatever that is making us, it's hands down research-based and we have research from my IT department. When you have a diversified staff, that company grows exponentially, right? And so the giving, and again, whether it's giving, But that is the part where the healing takes place. And again, it's giving with the right mentality and the mindset and state, right? Like, I'm giving you this because I'm tired of you, or, right? And so I would, if I'm engaging in that conversation with your daughter, it's like, okay, so what is it that's in your heart that you want to do? Because to be upset or to be fit. And that goes for either side, right? If I was having this conversation with a kid that didn't have it, right? Other than being upset, my question is, what is it that now you're going to do? Recognize where you are. I get it. And the only person that can change that or improve that is what? So we'll go over and engage and have a conversation with Rhonda, right? And say, Rhonda, go over and engage. So and that's this whole thing about building that. Again, here's the culture that's being built, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's too easy to feel bad.
I think I like that example that Rhonda had said, and I think when a person of color or a staff of color says that you don't understand because you're not Black or you're not brown, I think it's more of engaging that conversation more instead of saying, okay, and give up, versus don't give up. Instead, engage and just say, you're right, I'm not. And I want to learn more and I want to know more about how you're feeling. And it might be a uncomfortable conversation, but at least they know that you have the heart to really get into that conversation, no matter how hard it is. And so for your daughter, Rhonda, I know that she's kind. We know that. I think it would be when someone says, how do you don't understand because you're not this or that, I probably would be more engaged and just say, you're right. I'd like to know more. Tell me how you're feeling. So I think I'm just going to piggyback on what Brad says, is that engage more with that conversation, even though it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation.
So can I give an example of things that I don't know if I've realized until I've been quite a bit older, but so my family is, both sides are Norwegian, so they're from Norway. Grew up in Minnesota and then all over the nation, right? Military child. But I was always so curious that we were never taught Norwegian. Like, there's none of us that are bilingual. Not my aunts, not my mother. My grandma was, but they never spoke that language once they came over to America. And so it is like American white supremacy, right? It is English speaking. And now we see people that immigrate over and they do teach their children the language. And I think that is so rich, right? Because it's connected to culture and all of that. But I think I just wanted to kind of shine a light on that, because I think years ago, I think it was even more so, right? Like, if you're going to be in America, I mean, it was very much in our family, no one spoke another language, and they're all from the same, like villages, right, in Norway. And so I think that there has been this like expectation that if you are coming to America and you're white, you all speak English, and that has been, I realize how privileged I have been. Now, I don't know if I realized that when I was a child, right? I don't think it was ever talked about. But through my work and working with children throughout my career, I realized that, that privilege, and it does feel uncomfortable because I grew up very poor. Paulette and I have talked. In my high school, probably I would have been a homeless student. I moved often, single parent. So I never thought of myself as privileged. And yet I carry that privilege with me unknowingly, right? And so acknowledging that, I think, is really important. But I just wanted to raise that because I think we're not just talking about right now, we're talking generations and generations. Like, it is the river, right?
Mhm.
So, I don't know if you felt that, Preston, that was me giving you a hug. But that's the piece, it's, when we had the circles up and it said, the first is self, right? It's the self-examination. And I had a pleasure of pulling a quote out of the book. Abraham says, it's like fighting an addiction. Being an anti-racist is persistent self-awareness, right? And I would say that is true to if you come up with homophobia. I mean, you whatever it is constant self-awareness. Again, no one can take you there where you stay. You have to be willing to ride in or be saying, I'm on this journey and go so you can stay. All right. And then he then says, constant and regular self-examination. I have a bias. How am I behaving? I don't know. How am I behaving? I have privilege. How do I enact it? I don't have this, and these are the conditions. Still, how am I behaving? I have a choice. I have a choice. I could easily be an upset, frustrated, beyond angry, 6'6", 240-pound, angry black man. I've had things said to me that was unnecessary, that I did not deserve, just for being. Just for being. People have avoided me just for being. Those are my truths. But rather than sit, right? So then I have to choose. What am I going to do that's going to be different so that it's better? And I choose to show up here tonight. I choose to show up physically because I know and I still believe in what's in this room right now. And you don't look like me. And it's not an option. It's not an option. Because I know the other side is worse than where we are right now. And so if you think it's bad now, always understand it can absolutely get worse.
Thank you, Brad.
Honesty, overnight.
Kristen, I wanted to say something that you brought in the room that someone told me a long time ago, and it kind of like it still sits with me that our parents and family were doing the best that they could at the time.
That's right.
Especially when they recognized that they had to leave something at the door to become part of. And that part of was like the American dream, right? That was sold to a lot of immigrants, a lot of people. And so there was a lot of survival happening. If you look at your lineage, there's survival, and somewhere in that place, it was about survival. So that's where that outcome, where I was talking about like leaving something at the door, we were all taught to like leave something at the door so we could be considered part of that privilege, even though there was a cost. And what would it look like if we were thriving with all whole parts of us? So we didn't have to leave a language at the door. We didn't have to leave our, like, who we loved at the door. We didn't have to leave an important part of our culture at the door to look like, to be considered full. And that is a lot of historical structural things, but also it's like, yeah, we're all complex identities with some of us have privilege in other ways and some than not. So it's not that this is like a privilege or not. There's lots of things that are happening within that. And there's intergenerational trauma with that too, like feeling like, oh, I'm not this because I had to leave this at the door. So it's very complex. And if you're like, oh, this is so much, yes. And it's a journey, and kind of going through it, but it's the journey that's worth it because your kids are going to benefit from that. Not just your kids, but the kids in the district.
And I just want to hold down the acknowledgement. That was, yes. I don't know why I said it. And it's not about being right. Again, because it's just like, I didn't realize. And it doesn't make you a bad person, right? You are not a bad person. And be okay saying you can always be a better person. Like love that person, right? And understand too that the way we got here is through a lot of life loss and tears. And so don't expect the kitchen not to get messy when you create a different recipe. But again, the purpose of that is to feed all. So again, I'll go back to because Preston told me you had the book, and this is another one. And I don't have the page in there, but he just really calls out that I guess I would, well, these are my words. Like one of the worst things is the denial of rather than that denial piece. Just stay curious. You can tell me more about that. And it is appropriate to say, well, tell me why is that true for you, right? So if I agree someone, folks tell me, well, I don't have, and rather than me tell you, why is that true? Tell me that. Because you'll learn a lot more. And if you're trying to give people an opportunity to do their own discovery. And again, at the end of the day, she doesn't necessarily have to agree. But I know enough now that just trying to tell isn't going to get it. So it's like, why is that true for you? And then continue to have that what we call CRT. And to your point, Preston, is where is the history? And when we talk about things, education, systems, Lord, up the river,
Up the line.
up the line,
You
up the
get
line,
it.
there's a history there, right? And so we have to acknowledge, I'm keep saying, we have to acknowledge that history. Then we don't want Paulette to feel bad because she's up the line. It's like, okay, what do we do about the kids who are down the line? Do we continue or we can listen to that and just say that's the way it is? How do we do? How do we create a better, Eatonville school district?
And that's pretty powerful because none of us built the system, but we all have an opportunity to think differently about how to go. Like even thinking about how to move the pipeline, or even thinking about differently about how do we think differently about our policies, and how do we think differently about thinking differently about what we're built on. So if anybody's like, oh, this system, I feel so bad about it, it wasn't your fault. If you were here thousands of years or hundreds and hundreds of years ago, wow, give me your beauty tips. But this is like not about that, but it's about like, okay, what can you do now for the seventh generation moving forward? What decisions are you making now so that this can be disrupted? The system and the way it's acting be disruptive. And it could be, there's lots of, we like to call it opportunities
Right.
that are, it could be disrupted and stopped, in a different way. But when we learn the history, it's not a place of shame. It's about now we know how it was built. How do we change it to be more inclusive?
And
I love that.
Yeah.
History is not a place of shame.
yeah,
That is so powerful.
and I want to do a quick pause practice here, and that is we're going to try to go around the room and you can pull together a sentence, a word, like where are you right now? Because what we just did was heavy. And so be okay with taking that breath because this is part of the practice, right? So I'm taking that breath. Where are you right now? Getting centered. Start inside and then work yourself outside. Right? Start inside, work yourself outside. So once you feel it, someone share, like where are you right now? All of what's been said. Sentence or whoever. You just give it to the space.
Reflective. I feel like the last bit of time, weeks here, I started questioning core beliefs and really reflecting on who I am, who I want to be. Had to really look at some core beliefs lately.
I think for me, privilege in what we do live is what matters. And I've never thought of myself as privileged. I never did. I still don't today. But I get a lot of joy out of helping those who have less than me. and that helps me. It's something that's become a passion. But I never thought of myself as being privileged.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, these are concepts I'm aware of, but I've never really given a tremendous amount of genuine thought to them and how they apply to me and my history, family, and et cetera. So, yeah, for me, this is the beginning of a deeper dive, and it clearly is a lot to think about.
Thank you.
I think I'm hopeful, particularly the next generation. I feel like they see things clearer, they articulate things better, their hearts are more tender and more kind, and hoping, and I'm hopeful that we can walk with them and become better in that work.
Thank you.
I'm just honored to be able to do this work with a board that cares about children and that keeps the focus on kids all the time and the next generation and becoming better together and vulnerable, to be vulnerable together. I've done this work for years in different avenues, but really realizing, Felice, when you were talking about that, I was like, oh, that's actually in my own family, like reflecting. I don't know if I've ever really done that to that extent. So I think, again, it's like an onion. You can do it, and then you just kind of realize, and the children in today's world are so different than the way we grew up. We had one TV and we had to click it, and then we didn't have a remote. I mean, their access to information is just, so it's incumbent upon us to not get it right, but do this the right way. Well, and get it right, but not be right.
How about Lisa?
Lisa and Matt. Oh, Matt.
Matt just got booted.
Yeah.
So Tyler, if you can hear us, Matt was just booted from the meeting and the link won't let him back in.
And then can we hear from Lisa? Lisa, I know you're on the phone, but did you want to share?
Yeah, I'm here. I like what you had mentioned, Kristen, is that to be able to do this work and get into a deeper dive into this work, we have to be vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and really listen. I think we hear things and for me at least, those buzzwords, but it really doesn't make an impact on the work that we're doing if we don't really listen to it and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and understand what others that are depending on, regardless of what their background is and what they're experiencing is to be able to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. I'm not making any sense, but I know I think.
No, you are.
You're making perfect sense.
And I don't know who did that to me when I get stuck there. I really have to visualize, and again, I'm an old country boy, you're not. And if you truly want to feed the hearts and spirit of children, there's the only way you do it is you have to do the difficult, hard, callous work, whether it's emotional, whatever, and that is cut open the earth. You have to plow. And so you have to be open yourself, and then you have to plant the seed, the idea, the thought, right? For you to say, I never realized. So, right, and then now you go back and how do you nurture that? And for me, that helps me, right? You might have your thing, but I was like, okay, all right, stop trying to be safe, Brad. Stop trying to say the right thing and say what's true to you. And
Yes.
Mark, we tend to
Yeah.
interact. So I said, okay, let's be vulnerable. Let's open this up and plant a seed. You're right. And we heard that for a tree that we may not feel the shade of.
I think what's so easy to be vulnerable in this group is because I know this board and the superintendent and the passion that they have and the their will to learn. It allows me to be more vulnerable. But when I do have those experiences that when I'm outside this safe place or safe space, I have a hard time being vulnerable or being honest about my feelings because one, I feel like I'm going to be judged because of my color and my gender. And I don't feel that with this board. And so I sometimes have to have a more courageous and brave actions to share my feelings and to be vulnerable. And it's twice as hard. So I think I'm going to go with what Philly said is that it's about that relationship and about the people that are willing to do the work and know that it's going to be a hard work, but they're willing to do the work and not be judgmental about it. And I think that's what I really appreciate about this board.
Yeah, that's all about the relationship, and that speaks volumes that you all could feel like you can rumble together, because that's how you're going to build the skills and practice to do that further out, right? So if you feel you can be vulnerable here, what would it look like if it rippled out, and have a place of practice, and then being able to gain that? It feels so different, and it builds those like, okay, look, hey, you all have some privilege here. Can you help me out? I'll help you out. Like let's figure this out together. It just feels different, and those conversations start kind of feeling empowered to move that further out.
Yeah.
I love that. Yesterday when we were discussing podcast by Austin Channing Brown, you're familiar with her. She and Bettina Love were having this conversation in the continual push so it doesn't turn into pointing, which can easily happen. The question or reflection question was, what is it that you're willing to give to create that better humanity that you want? Because everyone says they want it, right? You hear certain groups, oh, we're going to move into this neighborhood because I want diversity. But I'm not willing to give up my, right? I want better teaching, however, but I'm not willing. So with that mindset, and we know, believe it or not, that giving makes us better and so. So what is it that we're willing to give? And it's hard because this thing of I want, I need, I want. But it is 100% okay to also ask, what are you willing to give? Be courageous. What are you willing to give? What are you willing to give to make Eatonville School District a better place? Is it a night or an hour to be a part of whatever? Because again, it's not necessarily for one individual, it's for students. And I love that piece, the switch, if you will. And that's why in the original piece we talked about what is it that folks need, and you all need support too. And other than Facebook likes or dislikes. No, it's appropriate. Say, hey, we need your support. There's nothing inappropriate about that. We need your support. What does support look like? Show up. Write something thoughtful that's really effective. That's 100% appropriate. But we say, oh, people are tired, and then a decision is made, and those same people that we gave an excuse of being tired are now upset. And all of a sudden they have a lot of energy. I'll just send you a lot of emails, and a lot of homework, right? It's true. It is so true. And what we find is when you ask, it feels of value. Jeff, I really want to know what you think. Rhonda, if you have a minute, can you look this up? Like, give me your thoughts on this. Because this is going to impact so many people. Right?
So Brad, I mean,
Yes.
so I hope that this board allows themselves the time to really feel comfortable and confident in the content and have time to really make those decisions.
Mhm.
So give them time, right? Because in this kind of organization, time is many times a luxury, right? Because we have so many things that have to be done, X, Y, Z, and there's so many timelines. But this is something, Elise, you said 5 years,
Yep.
right? To really get good. And so that's almost unknown for boards to be able to have the time. But this is a board that can do this really well together. But it, like you said, it's a journey. We
Yes,
can't
it is.
just like get off on the first, train stop. Like it's going up the line. Let it go up the line. Unless I'm wrong. I can also be wrong.
Absolutely not.
No, time is critical to most everything, and we're talking 5 years for a culture shift. Probably not going to be the same 5 people sitting here in 5 years. Boards change, they come and go, superintendents come and go. So, that makes it even harder to carry something like this through to its end. So,
I will say when I say 5 years, it doesn't mean that there's not significant amount of work happening in those 5 years. The first year is like the learning of like, okay, I'm learning this. And then second year is putting it in action in a way that is like, this is our values. Third year is like kind of fine tuning. The fourth year is like it's being, the fifth year is like you don't even know it's like where you were 5 years ago because you're in a different place. And that it's just like, it's not even, this is just how we are. Like, it's not even a question. It's like, this is our value. And no one will question it because it's so deep embedded. Like, this is how we function. This is how we are. This is what it is. So that's what 5 years means, is that it is so embedded in your culture and so embedded in your practices that's not even thought of as a practice anymore. It's so embedded. So I say 5 years because people want this to happen in a 1 year, and I'm to give compassion. When you were about in middle school, what is your value in education? Some of you would be like, you'd be in a different place with your value until you graduated. And then when you graduated, some of you may have gone to college or not, but that value of education, sometimes it took your child going to school, which is around the 4-year mark. The value of education feels different. Now it's like not something you think about, it's something you lead with. And that's where that shift is.
Maybe Matt wants
so Matt made it back.
Yes, I am back.
Hey, sorry, not to exclude you. We did a lot of, I would say, modeling for America. We actually talked about tough things and listened to each other, and did some reflecting. And so in all of what we've discussed, shared, we were offering opportunities just to get a feel of where are you with all of what's been shared tonight. I don't know if you had a chance to hear others, but.
Yeah, I heard most everybody speak there right before I got booted. No, I say what I've really learned from listening tonight is just that there's a lot of self-reflection that needs to happen still, and that there's a lot of things that you hear said, and there's some bias as to what the true meaning of some of the terms are. And really, listening with intent to learn is important, and I think that I'm excited about the work ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I see 10 minutes. We can do a couple things here. So Brad, either Brad.
I'm here.
Time is gonna,
I know it flies by.
holy moly.
Hold on, hold on, pull it up. Someone want to sing while I pull this up real quick and find out what's.
You aren't supposed to sing for the governor's mandate.
Oh, would someone like to hum an amazing tune?
Tap it out.
Let me pull up where we are.
That's true. We just had a few.
No, I don't, I don't want to, I don't think opening the number 7 up with serve, we'd have enough time to get through that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll assign that as an opportunity.
Sure.
And we'll
Yeah,
hold
with
off on
9
that.
minutes.
Yeah. Because we still have to do a closeout, and Paulette said she's gonna do some magic tricks, so I'm excited. So, if, yeah, I think, yeah, that's definitely not enough time.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with wrapping a couple minutes early.
Yeah.
Can I give some next steps?
Yeah.
So we have a documentary called Cracking the Code that we use for our trainings, and we decided that this conversation was way more important. But it's a really great documentary that talks about, it's focused on race, but I would like you to kind of think about it. If we were talking about race, I mean, it's all the identities can speak of that. And it talks about institutional structure, interpersonal, all the things. It's called Cracking the Code, and I will send you a link. And through that, it's a Google Doc, you can watch it. So it usually costs lots of money to watch it. We do this through our training. And so really, what you're wanting is like historical context that might relate to you. In fact, I'm going to send 2 videos. It's not a like you must watch, but one will give you the historical context around how race was even developed and all of these levels, and then 2, cracking the code. So House of Illusion and cracking the codes. It's really just great information to kind of understand the historical context and good information. And then also it talks about privilege. So I also recommend it watching with your kids, because it does talk about that and does talk about like what you can do with your privilege, which is highlighted by Dr. Joy DeGruy. It's a great segment. So they're both about 90 minutes. It's up to you, but I just want to welcome that. And another video that I will show you, I'll send about being an ally. What does that look like, being an accomplice? So those are 3 videos, and I'll send the PowerPoint as well.
And you know what, can we show the last slide? I think it puts us in a better frame.
Yeah.
Did I put you on the spot? I'm sorry.
Not at all. Let me pull it up.
So would that be something that you guys would want to maybe show one of the films before a board meeting or at the end of the board meeting, or is that not allowed?
We can show it. You can't. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you could show it at, sorry, I moved this a little bit.
Well,
You can show it together, like you can, based on my license, I can say, if you watch it by yourself, or if you watch it together, but not in a, like broadcasted out, then that's doable. The license come in place when you broadcast it to other places.
So we couldn't do it during.
I mean, I could show it during your next, like, I can show it during a training. And it could be broadcasted out. I have that license, but the secondary person can't. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And the other thing, you talk about information. And people are like, why are you doing this work? And everyone has their why. And the reason I'm going to put this slide in there is we want to give language. We want to build something that's incredibly important now, and that is coherence. And one of the things they use as a litmus test is not actually if people are doing the same thing, but can they say what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, right? And Felice talked about in year 5, but look, hey, why do you guys do land acknowledgements before every board meeting, right? And everyone in here knows, and everyone at the school knows. Like, that's a different culture. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so having an understanding like that creates such a solid permeating culture, as opposed to, and people know when you've been offended, right? It's like, yeah, singing happy birthday out of the side of your mouth. Like, I'm like, oh, she don't want to hear. But again, being grounded in why we do this work, why are you doing this work? And it's just, removing that and getting rid of the mindset, because again, for some that have had is, they're taking something away from me. And there is a resistance. And so it's not about taking away, it's about creating other opportunities, bigger table, expand the menu, right? And so thinking about what does it look like, because I don't know what Eatonville looked like 20 years ago, but we know it definitely wasn't the same as it is now. Don't know what Eatonville looked like 10 years ago. And we don't know what it's going to, and who's my real estate agent, that's what I was calling her. Who's my other board member? Was telling me about how the real estate has changed in the area. That was you? Okay, my real estate agent. See, yeah, I had it in mind. But think, well, what does it look like 5 years from now? I mean, truly don't know. But this is why we're doing this work. And so to have that, just those things of, we're interrupting inequitable practices. That's what we're doing here. And it's not pointing at a person, not pointing at school board, not pointing at teachers. We're interrupting. We're creating a better space for students, families, and community. So Noam Rice talks about this all the time, but we embrace difficult times in the positive, not in the negative. It's very important that we embrace this work in the positive. And it's important. Discovering, cultivating unique gifts. That's what we're doing. That's what you are doing. Back up. You are doing this. This is you. This is you. And I'm glad and more than happy and proud to be here. And my chainsaw is in the car. I'm ready to cut wood, whatever it takes.
Just in case.
Just in case. You're doing this work. I'm glad to be here. Please.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to leave you with this. What would our school system look like if every child, including the adults and employees, could bring their full selves to work and not leave anything at the door? And they were looked at as beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to leave you with, because and also know that it's not all on your back. This is like a lot of people. Don't put that pressure on your back, but just think about imagine what that could look like. What would it look like if everybody had that same view and that same why? Thank you. I'm going to say I've been with school boards and officials this week, and I just want to say, I know in a time like this, it's been very difficult couple weeks for multiple reasons, with everything a lot of things are happening. I just want to say thank you for staying in it, staying engaged, and doing what you're doing, not just tonight, but the work you're doing. I feel like elected officials are at a time trying to do the best that they can, and I just want to show immense amount of gratitude towards you, and being here and being in it when you could have checked out. So thank you for being in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last word whip around, and to help, last word whip around. If you had a senior or a student that was going into kindergarten standing in front of you, what would be your word or sentence? And Preston, you get to go last. So you have a senior kindergarten going into your school district or leaving your school district. What would be your word or sentence to them right now, given this time? We have to make it human. right? We have to bring it back in the room. Because that's who we're supporting.
My word, strive.
Mm. Thank you.
Mine is more than one word, but mine is know yourself.
Mm. Did everyone hear that? She said, know yourself.
Mhm.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah, I agree. I can't do one word. I think what I tell my kids already is just never stop learning.
Know something. One word or sentence.
Your kindergartner, it's gonna be the best time of your life.
Matt, Lisa?
I'm yeah, more than two words for me. I dream big and hope.
Mm.
Matt there?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So, a couple words. I also would say hope. The other one is work. I think we all have a lot of work.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mhm.
I have two.
Hey,
I'm gonna do the spectrum. Kindergarten, I was trying to remember the song that they sing, but they sing,
Big, big dreams.
I have big, big dreams,
Mm.
which always makes me cry, right? So we have big, big dreams for them. And for the senior, I would say, we see you. We see.
Mhm.
So.
all right. Mr. President, back to you.
Anybody have anything else to add or share or?
Just a quick thank you to those who are watching. Thank you for those emails and thank you for those who are watching this live or on YouTube afterwards. We appreciate that.
Yeah, very good. I always appreciate Felice and Brad